When I was younger, I lived in a small cul-de-sac in Northampton, England. This story is based when I was 5 years old. Before I start the story, I just want to say that I was one of those kids who had paranormal experiences a lot. I regularly pointed out people that weren't there, talked about people who died. I saw ghosts and faces in the mirror. I was one of those creepy kids that could see ghosts, and still am. It was 7 at night, and my mother was getting me ready for bed by herself because my father was out with his friends, and my 7-year-old sister was on a sleepover. I just want to make it clear that we were the only ones in the house. No siblings, parents, pets, or any other family members were in that house other than my mother and myself. I went to bed, and my mother turned off the lights, and I fell asleep. My mother went downstairs to watch TV and left me to sleep. At about 8 o'clock, half an hour after I had fallen asleep, my mother heard me crying and went upstairs to comfort me. I cried and told her that my bed was flying and I didn't like it. Assuming it was a bad dream, she kissed me and put me back to sleep and went back downstairs. An hour later, at 9 o'clock, the same thing happened. I started crying and again told my mother that my bed was flying and it was scaring me. She once again put me back to bed and went downstairs. At 10 o'clock, the same thing happened, and as she heard the same story of my bed flying again, she was getting a little irritated, but went back downstairs. At 11 o'clock, right before she was going up to bed, she heard my quiet voice squeak out, "Mommy!" I was standing in the doorway into the living room crying again, and told her, "My bed is flying again and I tried to tell them to stop, but it's still flying. I don't like it." Upset and angry, my mother took me upstairs and decided to let me sleep in her bed that night, just assuming it was a bad dream, and went into my room to get my teddy bear, and saw that my entire bed was on the other side of the room and had completely fallen on its side. Just remember that I was 5 years old. My mother was downstairs. My entire family was out of the house. There was nobody else in that house, and I was too small to push or lift my bed. Something that my mom had asked me to do after she shook off her fright, just to make sure she wasn't freaking out over something I had done, and I couldn't budge it. It was also strange how I had said multiple times that my bed was flying. I look back and think, was my bed flying? How could it have done that? Was it a spirit? I had told my mom that. I tried to tell them to stop. Who were the people that I was talking about? Was it a ghost? It will forever remain unsolved. I lived in a house with my father up until I was 13, which is how old I was when he passed away. All throughout my childhood, I thought our house was strange and had paranormal activity. However, my father refused to believe it, as he did not think ghosts were real. One night, I was awoken as if on instinct that someone was watching me sleeping. I didn't think it was my father, as I felt a very intense aura coming from whoever it was. Summing up my courage, I turned in my bed and stared straight at the figure. I couldn't see him with my physical eyes, but in the image of my mind, I saw the outline of a man. I could feel his malicious intentions towards me, as if he was trying to intimidate me. I spoke, saying, "Leave now, you don't belong here." Within a few minutes, he vanished. Several years later, I told my mother this story. She was completely shocked to hear this, and she told me she had a similar story. She had once lived in the house as well. During the middle of the night, my mother had the impulse to check on me and my sister. When she came to where our rooms were, she looked over to see a man smoking on one of the chairs in the living room. She knew this couldn't be my father, as he didn't smoke, and this man was very slender and tall, wearing a hat. She tried to get closer to our rooms, but it was as if an invisible force stopped her from going any further. After much pushing and threatening at the ghost, she was allowed entry to see us. After her recount, she told us of a man who had lived there before us. He was a contractor who had built the house and committed suicide within it. little background information. I'm a 22-year-old male, and I live 15 minutes south of Sacramento, California. I want to say this took place around 3 years ago, in 2014. I was living with my grandmother, and I was attending trade school full-time, and was having issues with my parents. We lived in a 2-story house that was roughly 15 years old, and in a great neighborhood. My dad would come to the house often to grab extra food, or if he just wanted to hang out. I remember it being a Friday night. Me, my grandma, and dad were relaxing, having some beers, smoking some weed, and we're just having a good time. I had only had 1 beer, as I'm not a big drinker, but all the festivities ended at just after midnight. I pulled out my bed and got a sleeping bag for my dad, as he was staying the night. We all fell asleep fairly quickly. In the middle of the night, I'm shocked awake to hear what sounded like the shattering of glass and a loud crash as something hit the floor. The noise, I instantly realized, had come from the bathroom. The bathroom would be to your immediate left as you walked out of my bedroom. Still disoriented from sleep, I stumbled over to the bathroom and proceeded to turn the light on. At first, I see nothing, so I walked to the other side of the room where the toilet and bathtub are. That's when I noticed that the mirror above the toilet was missing, and I found it on the ground, glass everywhere behind the toilet. I became frustrated knowing that I would have to clean up this glass. "Great," I said as my grandmother, a rather light sleeper, walks in to investigate. I tell her about the broken mirror, and then she tells me to just clean it up later and go back to sleep, as it was 3:30 in the morning. I oblige, disregarded the situation, and fell back to sleep. I wake up later in the morning and notice my dad is awake and he's not in his sleeping bag. I assumed he and my grandma were downstairs, so I get up and check the bathroom again. To my relief, the glass was already cleaned up. I continue to the kitchen where I see my grandma and dad. My grandma's on the phone, sounding very concerned, and my dad just sat there with this look of dread on his face. When they see me walk in, they both look at me and tell me to sit down. At this point, I'm extremely confused, so I ask, "What's going on?" My dad then tells me that a mirror falling and shattering is a sign that someone we're close to will die soon. Now, I've always been intrigued by paranormal and superstitions, but never experienced it before, so I was a bit skeptical about it. I told him he was full of shit, and that I'm sure there's a logical explanation for the mirror. My dad then told me to be careful when I leave the house, and to check my surroundings. My grandma just agreed with what my dad told me, and was calling my aunt to let her know about the situation. Now keep in mind, this whole time I'm thinking it's just a ridiculous myth, and that everything will just blow over and be okay. Around a week later, my grandma gets a call from one of our cousins in New Jersey. My grandma's face when she took the call was one of grief and sheer terror. What she tells me next had me literally feeling the hair on my neck stand up. She tells me that last week, another cousin of mine who I was particularly close with was murdered at a house party in Newark. He was shot in the face by what was believed to be some kind of gang member over a girl. I'm not sure exactly all the details of who it was, but my cousin was killed instantly. This news upset me, as I was very close with this particular cousin. But what really gave me the goosebumps was when she told me that he was killed the same night the mirror was broken at 3 a.m. I was shocked and in disbelief. I called my dad and told him what happened, and asked him how the hell he knew someone would die. My mind was saying it had to be coincidence, but my dad just told me that he had a personal experience, and to look at the wall where the mirror was and see for myself. I do as he says, and notice that the nail that held the mirror is still hammered into the wall. There's only one window and it was closed. There was no draft or wind and the door was shut. How did the mirror just come off the wall like that? I examined every inch of that bathroom trying to figure out anything that could have caused that mirror to fall. But there was nothing. It literally looked like someone had unhooked it and dropped the mirror. I honestly just could not explain it. Was my dad right after all? Was it a spirit maybe? Or just a chance coincidence? Maybe someone else can explain what happened. I'm a 30-year-old male, but this story takes place from the time I was between 8 and 10 years old. I cannot seem to escape the house I grew up in. It was my first home. I guess everybody probably holds on to the memories of their first home. I often have dreams involving people that are currently in my life, but that house always seems to be the prominent location in those dreams. I no longer live in the town I grew up in, but I visit my parents there often, and I even drive by the old house from time to time, just to see how much it's falling apart. I wonder if the people that have lived in the house since we moved out have had similar experiences. I cannot tell you that my experiences were paranormal. I just don't know what else they could have been. I was around 8 when it started, and I only recall this age from conversations with my parents. Most of the experience took place in the upper level of my home. At the top of the stairs there was a room we used as a toy room, then my parents' room. Down the hall there was a bathroom, my room on the right and my brother's room on the left. My room also had an entrance to the attic, which you had to climb into a cubbyhole to enter. I found this quite cool growing up. I would hear creaking sounds and light footsteps as if small animals were running around, but I never found this to be odd. Then it began. One night as I was lying in bed, I heard a loud but raspy voice call out my name from the direction of the attic cubbyhole. I immediately assumed it was my brother and told him to shut up. I did not get a response. I got out of bed and turned the light on, and there was no one there. I checked the closet to be sure, and again, nothing. I opened my door and went across the hall to my brother's room and opened his door. I turned on the light, and he was in his bed. Being a young child, I did not realize it would have been impossible for him to escape my room back to his own that quickly without making any obvious noise. I pushed on him, and he rolled over confused and asked me what I wanted. He swore that he was not in my room. Looking back on it, that voice was way too deep to be my brother's, as he was only 2 years older than I was, and still had that high-pitched voice. I know my father wouldn't have done it either, or if he had, he would have admitted to it. A few nights later, again while I was in bed, I heard a strange thumping sound coming from somewhere in my room. I couldn't tell what it was, or exactly where it was coming from. It wasn't a knocking so much as it sounded like someone just bumping into the wall. I called out to ask if anyone was there, and the thumping stopped. I crawled out of bed and turned on the light, and again, no one. I went to check and see if my parents were awake, and thought maybe someone was downstairs making noise. However, everyone in the house was asleep. I didn't bother waking them up. I just went back to my room. My mind did not jump to conclusions or anything yet, but I was beginning to feel a little scared. I laid back in bed, staring at the ceiling. As I was drifting to sleep, my brother screamed at the top of his lungs. I heard my parents barreling down the hallway, so I opened my door and followed. My brother was cowering in the corner of his room behind his bed. My mom asked him what was going on, and he said he woke up and there was a shape standing over his bed, and when he yelled, it moved towards his closet. My dad opened the closet door and found nothing. Now, I don't recall seeing this at the time personally, but many years later, my dad admitted that it did look like there were foot imprints in the carpet that he knows we had not made. I think they thought my brother was either playing a prank or had had a nightmare. We did not have any experiences for a while, but sometime later, I was watching Unsolved Mysteries with my mom. Afterward, she had to do laundry. She always hated watching that show and then having to go do laundry in the basement. I went down to the basement with her and sat on the stairs to talk to her while she worked. There's a room at the bottom of the steps that my parents never used. I think the only thing we stored in there were paint cans. While we were talking, we heard what sounded like a light string being pulled, and we could see light coming from under the door. "Hello?" my mom called out, but no answer. I walked to the bottom of the steps to open the door, and she stopped me. She nudged me back up a few steps so that she could open it herself. As she began to open the door, we could see a light bulb was on, but it suddenly blew out. We both sprinted up the stairs and had to catch our breath in the kitchen. I asked my brother if I could sleep in his room that night, and after a while he finally gave in. I put a sleeping bag on the floor, and we went to sleep. I don't know what it was exactly that woke me up, but something had. I looked towards the bedroom door, and it had cracked open enough that I could see the bathroom light was on. I assumed one of my parents was using the bathroom, as we did not generally leave the light on. Suddenly, I saw fingers wrapping around the bedroom door. These did not look like ordinary fingers, and the only way I can describe them is to say they reminded me of what a witch's fingers would look like. The fingers were long and kind of pointy. I yelled at my brother, who shot up in bed and turned on his bedside lamp. I looked back at the door, and there was nothing there. On top of that, the door was completely shut. My brother admitted to nothing that night, but years later when discussing it, he finally admitted that he had seen the hand too. If it had not been for my family having experiences, I would swear up and down that I was having very lucid dreams, and none of this was real. The next day, we had the stupid idea of trying to communicate with whatever it was. We didn't use a Ouija board or anything like that. There was a cup sitting on the dresser in my room. My brother said something to the effect of, "If there's anything in here with us, knock over that cup." Nothing happened, and we eventually left and played at our neighbor's, forgetting the whole thing. When we came home that evening, I went into my room, and the cup was laying in the middle of the floor. I screamed for my brother, and he came running in to see it too. We both freaked out and called our mom. We thought maybe she had heard us before and was messing with us, but she swears she had nothing to do with it. We officially lost our cool and said that we didn't want to stay there anymore. We spent a few nights at our cousin's house. During this time, my parents had no experiences. The first night back home, I felt kind of refreshed, like it was all over. That was short-lived, however. In the middle of the night, I was again awoken by the sound of thudding. I heard a loud bang, which to me sounded as if someone had jumped through the cubbyhole to my bedroom floor. I didn't scream, but I pulled the blanket over my head. I then heard a snarling sort of breathing on the other side of the blanket. I cried, and I didn't remove the blanket from my head until it was ripped down by my mom, who had heard me and ran to my room. There was no one and nothing else in my room. This was enough. My parents examined the attic the next day to make sure that no one was living up there and coming out in our house at night. But they found nothing. No broken windows, no holes, no signs that anyone had been up there at all. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't sleep. I didn't want to feel this way as a young kid. Luckily for me, my family decided to buy some land and build a new home. We put the house on the market, and it actually sold quicker than we thought it would. We began to pack up our house, and discovered something quite strange. When my mother was cleaning out the bathroom downstairs, she somehow managed to knock the mirror off the wall. The wall behind it seemed solid, except for a small hole. When she poked at the hole, it tore through a bit, enough that she could see that there was an opening behind the wallpaper. We all joined her as she revealed that there was a staircase behind the walls of the bathroom that led to the second floor, specifically under my bedroom. My parents let my brother climb up the stairs and to the top. There was what appeared to be a trap door, which would have opened in my bedroom. My bedroom, however, was carpeted, and we never knew that this was there. I went up to my room, and my brother pushed on the door, which made a thumping sound similar to what I was hearing all those nights. What does this mean? I have no idea. It was not like someone was living in there. They would have no way to get in and out as it was sealed up. This very much unnerved my family. I cannot explain what any of this means, but I have my own thoughts. Like I said, I still think of this house and what happened there often. We don't ever really talk about it or what we experienced there, but my brother and I mention the house occasionally, and he has revealed to me that he also can't seem to get that house out of his head. As far as I know, No other family members have experienced anything in that house. But from what I see now, the house doesn't appear to be taken well care of. And I wonder if anyone else lives there. This is something that happened about 6 months ago. For some background, I grew up in a religious household, which means my family believes in the supernatural. Spirits, angels, God, the devil. We believe it. My parents have told me stories, and I've had my own stories dealing with the supernatural growing up. I could see things when I was young, and as I grew up, every now and then I would see something in the house. Christmas 2015, my fiance bought me a huge panda bear that was almost as tall as me. I loved it and slept with it in my bed. After we got married and I moved into his apartment, there wasn't much room for the panda, so we placed it in the storage closet. What happened, to this day, is something that has not happened in over a decade. After moving in, I kept feeling weird sleeping in the bedroom, especially by myself. I always got that strong sensation that something or someone was watching me. I just brushed it off, because I figured it was just the feeling of being in a new place. On this night, my husband woke up out of the blue and saw me shaking as if I were having a seizure. He was going to call 911 when I woke up, sat right up, and gasped. I see a white hooded figure standing over him on the right side of the bed, peeking at us. My heart is bursting out of my chest. It's been a long time since I've seen this entity. He asked what was wrong. I said there was something looking at us. He turns to look in front of our bed, where the TV stand is, and he said it's sitting on the table. Immediately he grabbed me and began to pray in Jesus' name to rebuke whatever spirit it was. It went away. Neither one of us could sleep the rest of the night. We stayed up discussing what we had seen. While what I saw was a white hooded figure, he had seen a black hooded figure crouching on the table. The next morning he says, "Do you think that panda had something to do with it? Because I get an eerie feeling every time I walk past it." I tell him that I feel the same way whenever I look at it too. Even our dog barks at it and tries to attack it. We contemplated the whole day on whether or not we should throw it out. So the following day he goes to work, and I'm alone with the dogs. I decide to cleanse the house using the anointing oil that my parents gave me and pray. Every time I walk past the closet with that panda and say Jesus, my whole body would go cold, and I would have shivers and goosebumps all over. I called my husband and told him what had happened, and when he came home we threw it out. It felt a little better in the apartment, but not too long after things started happening again. So, I had my dad come over and pray, and things were much better after that. So for almost 2 weeks things were calm. Our upstairs neighbor is a strange woman who never leaves her house, and hardly sleeps. I can hear her around 1 a.m. moving stuff, and walking around every single night. I always get weird vibes from her. So anyway, when my husband first moved in, she gave us some groceries. Fast forward to a few days after my dad comes and prays. She gives us a chew toy and snacks for our dogs. Shortly afterwards, that feeling of being watched returned. And that night, I had just dozed off when I felt the bed shaking. I look at my husband, and he's shaking, just like I was in the previous incident. I look over by our closed bedroom door, and this humanoid creature is crawling on the ceiling trying to hide in the darkness of the corner. It was hard to make out, but I know it was a grayish dark color and had some type of horns. I don't know what to do at this point. I'm not as spiritually strong as my parents, so just praying wouldn't be good enough. I turned on a song called Jesus, 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 and I put it on low and repeat, and was able to fall back asleep. I've long thought it had something to do with whatever my neighbor was into. The same time that she wakes up in the early a.m. is when I would get that eerie feeling of being watched. Something I also noticed between these two incidents. I always lucid dream, meaning that I know I'm dreaming and I can manipulate my dreams, and even sometimes drag them out longer than I want. I've been doing this since I was around 8 years old. I also always remember when I wake up. During these two occurrences, I didn't lucid dream and believed what was going on was real. Plus, after waking up, I couldn't remember what had happened in them. It felt as if whatever that spirit is was implanting those dreams in my head. I threw out the dog toy and had both my parents come back and pray and do a cleaning with the oil. Every now and then, when I don't pray throughout the house, that feeling comes back, and I see shadows move out of the corner of my eye. So I have to constantly pray and anoint the house every few weeks. Our lease is up in April, and hopefully we can move. If you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. If you would like a chance to have your story featured in an upcoming video, make sure you email it to yourmaker6260@gmail.com. And if you would like to gain early access to my content, as well as some other cool perks, make sure you go check out my Patreon page. It's a cool way for you to get some cool perks as well as support the channel. I appreciate everyone checking out this video, and I'll catch you in the next one.